I want to be more intimate with you, Lord.
All I knew is that she went to heaven to live with God, and I felt abandoned. And she would make us sit in a room by ourselves, and she would tell us she was taking us back to an orphanage. Right after my mom and dad died, my family was torn apart. I started getting molested by my new family's brother. I was 5 years old at the time, and I had to live with that until I was 11.
Your passion, renew our spirit deep in me. Set me free, free to live with you.
I started reading scriptures, and the Lord told me, He said that if I trusted Him, that He would heal me, deliver me, and set me free. And I thought, there's no way I can trust Him.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Colette Burque. Did you know that there are people on this earth today who have never been loved and never been affirmed in a healthy way? Their entire life, all they've ever experienced is hatred, abuse, and neglect. They've grown up believing that they are defective, unlovable, and born to a life as a victim of the lust and the hatred of others. Today's guest had just such a life until she met Jesus.
I was 2 years old, and I lost my father. He had a massive heart attack, and he died. And when I was 5, I was staying on the front porch, and I watched the ambulance take my mother away, and she never came back. And all I knew is that she went to heaven to live with God, and I felt abandoned. There was a hole. I didn't know God, but I remember my mother praying a lot before she died. I remember her going next to the door to pray with the preacher. And I remember my mother being very sick, laying on the couch where she couldn't get up. She was just very sick. But I knew that my mother loved me. And I felt love from her. And it was a love that was just deep. And so after I was told that my mother was gone, I became very sad. Like, my brothers and sisters, we were all separated. And I just shut down inside, like I wouldn't talk, and I refused to eat until my mother came back. I remember thinking this, that I'm not going to say anything, or I'm not going to eat until she comes back. 2 weeks go by, and I'm not speaking to anyone, and I'm throwing all my food on the floor. And so they take me to my Aunt Tiny's, and they drop me off. And I remember feeling like nobody wanted me, that my mom left. To go live in heaven with God, because she didn't want me, because I wasn't worthy. But I didn't know that she was going to a better place, so she didn't have to suffer anymore. I'm not close to my adopted mother. She was very abusive to us growing up. She would lash out at us in her anger, and she would say things to, to hurt me and to destroy the joy that I had inside of me. Like, she would physically beat us until we bled, with sticks, with yardsticks, with paddles, like 2x4s, like whatever she could find. She would lash out in her anger, and she would take it out on us. And she would say things to hurt me, like call me stupid and tell me that I was no good. And I grew up believing that I used to pray every day and ask God to bring my mother back, to take me out of the nightmare I was living, is what I called it. I started isolating myself as a child. I would read books to kind of escape from the reality of what my life was. and the feelings that I felt of not worthy, and like no one really cared about me, and that I wasn't loved, and I never had a sense of belonging. And whenever my parents would argue, she's like, I'm taking my 2 children and leaving. And so, or if we got in trouble, she would like take everything we owned from us, and she would make us sit in a room by ourselves, and she would tell us she was taking us back to an orphanage. And she would make you say goodbye to your brothers and sisters. She was wounding me over and over again. I began hating myself. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I began to not like this person I saw, because I felt like if she hated me, then I should hate myself. And I started thinking about suicide at 11. And I remember thinking if I could just take a bunch of pills, I could go to sleep and never wake up. And I wouldn't have to endure any more of her abuse and trauma. My father had cheated on my mother, and then they worked it out, and then she cheated on him, and then he found out, and he left her. We went to my parents and told them that my mother's brother had been molesting us for years. And when I was a child, we told her, and she beat me and put me in my room and told me if I ever spoke like that again, that she would send me away from the house for good. And so I had to live with that from the age. Right after my mom and dad died, my family was torn apart. I started getting molested by my new family's brother. I was 5 years old at the time, and I had to live with that until I was 11. And he finally got a wife of his own and moved out. And so I was 15 when we told my parents about my uncle. And everyone in the family, they were lashing out at us. We were liars. We were no good. We should have never been adopted. I took on the stigma, the role that we just like should not have even been born, is how I felt growing up. Like, God, why did you bring me in this world to suffer? And I really believed that for a while, that I was just put here to suffer and to hurt and to live in pain, and I never knew joy. I went to live with my father in Florida, because she was in Georgia and he was in Florida. And my father was drinking a lot, and he was we were in a college town, and I started like smoking cigarettes around my dad, and he didn't care because he smoked. And I started going to the bars with him, me and my sisters, and my little brother. I really don't remember where he was. He was only 14, but we would go out to the bars and get drunk and like just wake up somewhere in someone's bed the next day, don't remember anything, and I came in from school one day, and my dad had packed up all his things, and he left me and my sister and my brother. My brother was 14, and I just turned 17, and my sister was 18. I just remember like going through this like hating myself, and just to back it up, my brother had raped me before I moved, right before my parents got divorced. And that created a whole bunch of feelings. This is my birth brother. Like, I just remember feeling shame and disgust. Like, I couldn't live feeling the way I was feeling. And so after my father left me, about a week after that, I took approximately 900 aspirins, and I laid down and went to sleep. And my brother came in the room, and he found me laying on the bed with the empty bottles of aspirins. And he called 911. I got out of the hospital after being there for 7 weeks, and I went to stay with one of my dad's friends, and like her husband, like he was trying to come on to me, and here I was 17 and I was vulnerable. So I left there and I went to the streets, and I was homeless at 17. So I got pregnant by an older man. I was 17, he was 41, and we had 2 children together. And he died when our second baby was 6 days old. When I had my kids, this girl told me that she knew how to make a lot of money. And because I didn't have money, I was on welfare, and I had just enough to pay my rent, and I didn't have enough for diapers. And, like I had $10 left, and that was just paying rent with all utilities included. I just didn't know what I was going to do because he was gone. And so she talked me into going to a strip bar and working at a strip bar. And you can make a lot of money, and all you had to do was to take your clothes off and dance. I thought, wow, I wonder if this is this morally legal or is this illegal with God? And so, I went, and in order for me to do it, I had to get drunk. I had to put a lot of alcohol on me to get up there and do it. And I did make money, but I felt so heavy after doing that. I felt like I was going against everything God wanted me to do. Morally, I felt like I was doing something wrong. But the more I drank, the easier it became, because I didn't feel that feeling inside of me. I didn't hear that voice telling me, no, don't do this. Don't do this. I have better for you. I can provide for you. But I was angry at God, and I just felt like he didn't love me either. No one else loved me. They all left me. And so it was in the strip bar that I was introduced to a pimp. I managed to make about $5,000 at night, and he took off with everything. And then my kids come down with chicken pox. Now they both got chicken pox. We had to move to another motel. I lost half their clothing. I had no money for diapers. I didn't have money for food. He took everything. And I was crushed. I was looking at my children this isn't right. This is so selfish of me to try to hold on to my children. And I got on my knees and I prayed. And I asked God, what do you want me to do? I can't care for these children. I couldn't do it, and I realized that. And I heard a voice say, call CPS. And let them take your kids so they don't suffer. They were suffering. And I did that. And so I said, well, give me a couple hours so I could just explain to my children, what's going to happen. And my oldest son, he's like, Mom, I don't want to go with anyone. I want to stay with you. And I told him, you have to take care of your brother. And I love you. And it's just going to be temporary. And so the people came. And my kids were screaming. They were crying. They were like, Mom, we don't want to go. And my heart tore out. I felt like I was abandoning my children like my dad abandoned me. And so I called that CPS place every day. And I didn't get a visit for a month and a half. I didn't hear any word about them. And during this time, I was still dancing in a club. And I began doing drugs. I hurt so deep inside. The pain from being separated from my children. I began doing cocaine and drinking. I was drinking heavy. I'd stay drunk all the time. I'd wake up and I'd drink, and I'd pass out and I'd get up and I'd drink. I didn't want to feel the loss of my children. And they made me sign a paper stating I had abandoned my children. And I thought, well, I didn't abandon them. I did what was right for them. They said, no, you abandoned your children. You have to sign this paper. So I did. And I signed a paper stating I had abandoned my children. I met this guy in the strip bar, and he told me, about selling your body for money. You can make more money. And I wanted to be loved. And so I began selling my body in the strip bar. And the guy that owned the strip bar, you would pay him $20, and you would go in the back room, you'd prostitute, and you would keep that money, but he had to get $20 off of it, off the top. And so, I stayed so drunk all the time and so high all the time, like I didn't want to feel. And if I didn't feel, I didn't hear God telling me, or his angels of mercy, speaking to me. So if I stayed high or drunk all the time, I didn't feel condemned and or convicted. And so it wasn't until I started getting high on crack that I ended up on the streets. And the guy that I was with for 2 years, basically he was my pimp, and I would give him all my money when I got off from work. And I was making about $250,000 a year, and he would keep all my money, and he would give me money to go shopping, but I had to go through him to get anything. And like, I thought it was love. I thought he loved me. Like, he took care of me, is how I justified it. But I failed to realize that I was the one that was working and making all the money. I was the one making the sacrifices. I was the one putting myself at risk for diseases. And just not that, I was risking my soul. And I began smoking crack. And it like took everything from me. Like, I just didn't want to live anymore. I didn't care anymore. My kids were gone. It was like there was no light in my life anymore. And my life became very dark. And I was raped on the streets. And I was told by the police that it was my fault because I was out there. And had I not been prostituting, that it wouldn't have happened to me. And I had near-death encounters where God saved me. Literally, the Lord came down and saved me. The first incident I can think of is I was here in Fort Worth, and I was raped and beaten, left for dead. And it was 18 degrees out, and this man took all my clothes and all my personal belongings and left me unconscious on the ground so I would freeze to death, or I would die from the head trauma. And I remember seeing a bright light. And there was a man there, and he said, "Louisa, do you want to live or do you want to die?" And for the first time, I answered I wanted to live, and I meant it in my heart that I wanted to live. And so he said, "If you want to live, I've got to help you off this ground, and we've got to get you help, or if you stay, you're going to freeze to death and die." For 3 days prior, I didn't have a voice. I couldn't speak. I had laryngitis. Well, and I do speak fluent Spanish. So when I woke up, I was laying on someone's front porch. There was 2 men standing there. It was the one guy, I think it was my angel, my guardian angel. And the other guy was Spanish. And I told him in Spanish, I spoke clearly that I needed help to call the police. And then I remained unconscious for 3 days. I woke up in the hospital. My liver had been torn. My heart had been bruised. I was beat bad, but I don't remember it to this day. And I just know that I've forgiven him. And they caught him 2 years later and prosecuted him, which that never happens, And so to actually hear from a police that we want to get you justice, that you did not deserve this. This happening to you was not your fault. You did not deserve this. No one deserves this. And I thought, he just doesn't know who I am. On January 2nd of 2008, I was diagnosed with HIV, and that was a devastating blow of my life. That was the turning point of events that I went to JPS hospital to the 10th floor, and I said, "You take me or I'm going to commit suicide." They kept me in there for 3 days, and I just cried the whole 3 days. I thought, how? I'm going to die. I'm not going to be able to see my kids again. I thought that my life was over. They said there was no cure for HIV. People die from cancer. They just die. If that doesn't kill them, the medicine kills them that they take to prolong their life. And I started really living in condemnation. The world says that because you are a prostitute, that you deserve everything you get. And I thought, wow, I deserve this. Because I loved sex. That was my thing. I loved men. I was addicted to men because they made me feel loved. They made me feel special. They made me feel important. They made me feel like it was a fantasy, that I wasn't really living in reality. So when I got diagnosed, that was like totally like, wow, I deserve this. I started reading scriptures, and the Lord told me, he said that if I trusted him, that he would heal me, deliver me, and set me free. And I thought, there's no way I can trust him. You know, look, everything's happened. It's all because of him. He caused all these things to happen. And I really blamed everything on God. And it wasn't until like I got out of the hospital and the psych ward, and I was sick for 2 years. I had 162 infections in less than 2 years. I was in a hospital, literally dying from my liver being so swollen and my counts being so high that they didn't know why. And I got diagnosed with liver disease, hepatitis C and B. And I thought, oh, great. Not only do I have HIV, now I have liver disease, I have hepatitis. I'm just a walking disease, you know? And that's literally how I felt. Like, I felt so low that I began to really think about suicide again. And I was just like, I'm sure this is what I'm supposed to do. And I couldn't see any other way out. It was either God to either take me from where I'm at, and I would pray every day for like 4 years. God, I know you're out there. I need you to help me get off the drugs, help me get off the streets. So I walked past a store one day, and there was Christian people there. And like, they looked at me and they didn't judge me. And I just felt this an incredible amount of love come from them. And the love that I felt coming from them, I knew that it could only come from God, because I had experienced it after my mom died when I was 5 years old. I experienced the love of God. And I felt like God was wrapping his arms around me then after my mom died. And so I remember there's like, you know, here's food. And at that point in my life, I was plotting my suicide, like literally days away. I was getting ready to take my life, and I had already planned out I was going to get a room, take a bunch of pills. And I was, matter of fact, before I met Noelle and Rick, I was going to the store to buy the aspirins, but they didn't have any there. And I was going to just buy a bunch of pills and take them. That's what my purpose for going past that store that day was. But when I went in, they didn't have them. So I couldn't buy them there. So I had to get up to CVS. And then I ran into Noelle and Rick and down the church. And I just saw a bunch of people like crazy in love for the Lord. And I thought, God, that's what I've always longed to be, right where they were at. And like, I didn't want anything from them, because I didn't want them to see how bad I was hurting. I thought maybe God was going to wreck my suicide attempt like he did when I was, 17. And so I kept going that day. And I just remember once I got past him, I just began to cry. And just the pain was so overwhelming. I just began weeping. And meeting them that day, I felt like, wow, what was it about them? Why didn't they judge me like the world judged me for being a prostitute? Like, I had no idea I was going to be giving my life to Christ that day at the police station. And before Terry let me go, the lady that took me, she's like, well, let's just give your life to Christ and surrender all to him. I was like, okay. And so I did. And I went into the church at Convergence. And when I walked down to the front, because Noelle said it was okay if we walked to the front and like praise, dance to the Lord, whatever we want to do. And I felt the chains, like I heard a clinking noise. And I was looking around and I felt like chains that were on my wrist and around my neck that had been so heavy for so years. I heard them hit the floor. And I thought, wow, this is powerful. And I looked around and I just started praising God. And I walked out of that church that day feeling the lightest I'd felt in many years. I got set free. And then I went back to the doctors again, and now the HIV is non-existent in my bloodstream. And so when the Lord said that he would heal me, deliver me, and set me free, he was true to his word.
You may not have ended up as a stripper or prostitute, but as you listen to Louisa's story, you may have seen yourself in her self-hatred, her self-loathing, her sense of worthlessness, or perhaps in her tale of abuse at the hands of evil men or women. My heart goes out to you over the abuse you've suffered. But you can also have the same experience of God's love that Louisa has. You can also give your life into the hands of Jesus Christ and follow Him into a new life, one filled with meaning and purpose, a life where you are loved by God Himself. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Why not do what Louisa did? Come to Jesus right now and find eternal rest for your soul and an eternity with Him in heaven. Until next week, I'm Colette Burque for Pure Passion.